Hi, my name is Jen Murphy. I'm a U.S. journalist reporting live from the floors of the We Are Africa conference in Cape Town Stadium. And this year's We Are Africa campaign, Made in Africa, is meant to replace the stories about Africa with stories told by and for Africa. So with me here today in that spirit, we have three individuals dedicated to telling very different stories, very real stories from their various destinations. So if you guys wouldn't mind going around introducing yourselves, telling us where you're from and what companies you work with.
My name is Iain. I'm pleased to meet you. I'm from Cape Town and I run a company called Coffee Beans Roots.
My name is Ngozi. I own Zigona Travel. We operate out of Lagos, Nigeria.
And I'm Susie Potter. I'm the owner and CEO of the Africa Safari Company. We're based in Sydney, Australia.
Good. Well, thank you guys for joining me. And I want to start out, traditionally, the luxury travel industry has really thrived on selling this kind of colonial fantasy of the continent to outsiders. And while that has certainly worked in attracting tourism and deservedly promotes, a unique and exciting experience, the industry has also been criticized for failing to acknowledge just, the amount of diverse experience Africa has to offer. And, Iain, I'd like to phrase the question to you. You work primarily in urban destination in Cape Town, and how you think we can kind of shift the perception of offerings, particularly in urban destinations.
Wow. No, the thing is that it's inherent in everything. It's become such a powerful technology, colonization, that it's become invisible. So it's in our language. It's in everything. It's in our architecture. It's very difficult to get past it. It's very difficult to get past it. If you're not aware of it in some way, then it's very difficult. I mean, I think a lot of people in tourism are not even aware that when there is a beaded animal head on the hotel wall, it's not craft, it's not art. That is what you're dealing with is the destruction of an animal for your own ego on a wall, whether it's made of beads or it's a real animal. I mean, that's every single hotel in Cape Town has an animal head in some form on the wall, which is one of the real vestiges of the colonial gaze, right? I think that for us to circumnavigate that is to ensure that whatever operations we're involved in are focusing on telling the stories that previously were not able to be told. And that means, and it's not always easy for the established industry, is to hand over to other people and allow agency. I think one of the vestiges of a colonial mindset is the control. So even if you blacken up a safari lodge, that doesn't mean that colonization is no longer in the picture. There's an unhandling, there's a handing over, and there's a level of agency that has to become possible in order for that to change. For me, the most primary way to do that is through story. It's through making sure that the greatest groundswell of stories come up that challenge the colonial narrative. But it's very disempowering for those who are the establishment, very disempowering. And there's it's fraught with fear that your position is going to be lost. And I think when people understand that giving over to story actually strengthens rather than disempowers your position, that understanding, if that can happen, it can really fast track a space where we can get beyond our colonial interpretations of things, but also the colonial fashion in which we act that is very subconscious.
Very good answer. Ngozi, as a buyer who works within Africa, I'm curious your thoughts on how the industry can continue to showcase the wildlife and natural beauty that makes Africa unique without, alienating the other destinations, the people, and other experiences that kind of modern Africa offers today.
Yeah, I think we can do that by telling a different story. For example, in West Africa, where I come from, we don't deal with a lot of wildlife. We sell stories about the past. Traditionally, we've sold stories about slave trade, the slave route, and all of that. But in Nigeria, particularly, we don't sell any of that anymore. We sell cultural themes about Nigeria. We sell what is currently happening in Nigeria. And so we're selling our music, we're selling our fashion, and we're selling our way of life. So the focus is not on the past anymore. We are selling our present and the future, and we are doing it in a sustainable manner. You know, we try to involve the community in everything we do. We give back to the community. So the hoteliers, for example, they are required to involve the community in what they are doing. And so when they bring their big brands, they have to employ the local people, train them, and then the government is involved, the private sector is involved, and so we're trying to make tourism sustainable for the future, and also try not to alienate the people that are that we're using their space. Yeah.
Fantastic strategy. Susie, my question for you is, being based in Australia, I'm sure a lot of your clients, this is, you know, their first time trip to Africa, and I'm curious what stereotypes you often see about the continent, and how, I guess, the biggest thing you think people are missing, you know, those hidden gems are missing about Africa.
Well, I guess the main thing with people coming from Australia is the unknown. The fact that Africa is probably still a very unknown continent in Australia, and of course the fact that it is unknown, it actually brings across a fear. We get a lot of unfortunate bad press about violence and crime and things like that happening in Africa. So as a tour operator, we try and obviously educate the public, and of course the best way to do that is to obviously get people to come across to see the continent for themselves, to see how wonderful the wildlife is, how fantastic the hotels are. People do still have a perception that you know, it's deepest, darkest Africa. They don't realise there's magnificent hotels, there's beautiful beaches, there's fantastic wildlife. So really the most important thing is to try and get the tourists to come into the country so that they go home and tell positive stories about what's going on. As a tourist, obviously, you know, there's some fantastic areas to visit, and what we have found is that nobody ever comes to Africa just once. They always have to come back again. It gets in their blood, and they just have to keep coming back time and time again and discovering something new. So we always want to just try and call that fear of that first trip to Africa, and once they've done that and stepped foot into the area, they become quite confident and obviously go home and let their friends and families know about it.
So each of you tells a very different Made in Africa story, and I'd be curious to hear, why is it so important to each of you and your companies to share your particular stories with the world?
I think story is where the nuance is. I mean, we get marketed as a collective, right? And there's nothing particularly nuanced in the collective. Whether your collective is a group of people or a street of people, tourism has the opportunity to get really into very personal narratives, and I think that's where the value is for the visitor. It's where the value is for us in sharing the stories. And that requires overcoming a fair amount of fear, our own human conditioning. But I mean, I find what's amazing is we all come from very different points of view. We all see things in very different ways. But we very quickly realized that we aren't all that different, in spite of the apparent differences. You got kids, you got to get them to school, you got to feed them, you got to change their shitty nappies. It's the same thing. It's all the same fundamental thing that we share as human beings. And there's a lot of rubbish that gets in between there that makes us stop seeing each other. For me, tourism is potentially one of the most powerful factors in alleviating those layers of tension, because it does take us from one place to another to engage. It's not always intentional, but the accidental engagements are often where the greatest meaning comes. And I think as human beings, we're all searching for meaning. That's ultimately why we travel. We go and see lions, not just because we've got time and money to kill, but we're searching for something. We don't always know overtly what it is that we're searching for, but we travel because we're trying to find something. And I think that's why well-curated travel experiences should and can challenge how we see the world and help us to arrive at a different place. So, I mean, for me, tourism can be an overtly political medium. That's where I'm interested in it.
Well, for me, it's important to sell Africa to Africans, because I see that a lot of Africans don't know much about the rest of Africa. They know so much about Europe, they know so much about Australia, about United States, but they don't know about Africa. And the rest of Africa see us as one. So it's better for us to know about our Africa, the rest of Africa, so that when we go out, we can tell our different stories together, because our stories are so intertwined. I think that there was a lot of traveling in the past between one part of Africa to the other, and we are all one and the same. And so when we learn about the different cultures, we begin to recognize that we're actually one country, one state, and then we can face the rest of the world.
Susie?
For us, obviously tourism provides many jobs to many people. So obviously tourism out of Australia, it is a fantastic job to be involved in. But for me as well, I think travelling to Africa and tourism itself is an education. That's the most important thing that we've found. We're doing a lot of family holidays now to Africa, and it's just the most wonderful way to educate children about the world, how other people live, so that they get outside of their own little environment that they live in. So for us, and for me, tourism and being able to travel the world is just an eye-opener and an education for everybody.
You guys all had some great points, so I want to thank you for joining me and sharing your Made in Africa stories, and I want to thank you all for watching, and you can continue to watch for more Made in Africa stories coming to you live from the floors of the conference, and we'd love to hear your comments on social media, and please use the hashtag #NotOneStory.